I'm Post-16 and welcome to this week's briefing, coming to you from my home. Hopefully you are safely in your home as well. Please have your notifications turned on so that you see messages when they come through on our community classroom. Equally, please be checking your Google Classrooms regularly for posts from your teachers, because I know lots of you have been missing things that your teachers have been posting for you on there. Our focus this week in briefing is around attitude to learning, because the reason we built it into the parade standards is because great attitude to learning leads to success at the end of 2 years of study, and that ultimately is why all of us do what we do in school, why we do what we do and why you do what you do. And we have proof of that this week, because this week we had our Year 13 IB students receiving their IB grades. They get them much earlier than the A-levels and the B-Techs are released. And we had a fantastic year for results this year. We had, for example, 56% of our students had their IB grades come back as between grade 7 and grade 5. That's the top grades that the IB awards. Just to put it in context for you, a grade 5 is equivalent to a B grade at A-level, a grade 6 is equivalent to an A grade, and a grade 7 is equivalent to an A star. Now, whether it's an IB qualification or an A-level, only about 5% of students that take those qualifications are awarded that very top grade of an A star. And you can imagine how delighted we were in just our second year of working with the IB and getting a full cohort of students come through to have one of our students taking a higher level IB course be graded at grade 7. So one of the top 5% of students, not just in the UK, but internationally. That was an awesome achievement. But having more than half of our students getting the equivalent to a B grade or higher was absolutely sensational. We were so proud of them. And in fact, very nearly 90% of our IB students were graded at grade 4 or higher, so the equivalent to a C grade or higher, what's considered to be a good pass. That was a pretty amazing achievement in a non-selective school, in a selective county, as we are. 5 of our 8 subjects had every single student that took those qualifications get at least a grade 4 or higher. Now, those success rates are significantly higher than A-level or B-Tech pass rates for that number of subjects. So we hope that those of you in Year 12 that are currently taking IB subjects recognise that they're a great way for you to achieve brilliantly, and we hope that all of you that collected your results in Year 13 this week are as proud of your results as we are. You can see from some of the pictures on there that it was quite a different results day this year. You can see we had to have people doing social distancing outside. People had to be very far apart from one another when they were collecting their results. They weren't allowed to touch one another or give each other a congratulatory hug. But there was definitely an atmosphere of joy in that room, with so many people opening up such great results. Now, lots of students and their parents have been asking us, how did the IB actually come up with those grades this year, given that students didn't get to take exams? So what happened was that every year the IB asks teachers to provide a predicted grade. So when we submit your coursework marks, we always submit a predicted grade, so it was no different this year. What the IB did was they extrapolated how well students were likely to have done if they'd taken the exams based on how well they performed in their coursework. And instead of having teachers in school mark that coursework, the examiners that they had lined up ready to mark exams this summer, they stepped in and then marked the coursework. So all of the marks that were awarded for coursework were generated by IB markers, not by teachers in school. They then looked at years worth of previous students and saw, okay, if a student got that many marks for coursework, what did the typical student go on and achieve when they then took the exam? Because in most cases people do better in coursework than they do in exams. But they didn't just look at last year's results or the year before's results, they looked as far back as they could go, and they didn't just look in the UK, they looked internationally. So they compared everybody that had got a particular mark for a piece of coursework in a particular subject, they compared them with students all over the world and going back as far as the age of that specification went. And they used that to come up with the best, most statistically accurate prediction of how well students who got that mark in their coursework would have gone on and got in their exams. Given that there were 174,000 students in 158 countries this year who would have been taking exams, that seems to me to be the fairest way for the IB to have worked out what grades people have been given this year, given that nobody anywhere in the world was able to take exams because of the pandemic. So I hope that explains how those grades were generated. Now going ahead, when we get to the middle of August, we'll get our A-level and our BTEC grades. Those grades are being calculated slightly differently. So teachers had to compile as much evidence as they could from the last 2 years of working with students, and once they'd assembled a whole big bank of evidence, they had to then make their best professional estimate of what grade each student in each subject would have finished on. These were called centre assessed grades, and we had to submit those to the exam boards at the start of June, and the exam boards are now doing something similar to what the IB did. They're now comparing the grades that we have put in, and every other school in the UK has put in, with the performance of students in previous years, going back a number of years, so that they can ensure that this year's students, based on the grades that schools have provided, achieve grades that they are likely to have gone on and achieved. So it was a similar but slightly different way for the A-level exam boards and the BTEC exam board to calculate grades. We will get those grades come through in the middle of August, and we are hoping that we will have a similar level of success with our results for those qualifications when Year 13 students come in to get their results on the 13th of August. Now, why is that important to you now if you're in Year 12? Well, I need to just lay a few things on the line for you here. We are still in the midst of a global pandemic, although it might not feel quite as dangerous anymore because of lockdown being eased. We are still in the middle of a pandemic, and the pandemic is moving around the world. It's moving into new parts of the world, and they're currently going through their first wave of infection. But it's also now started moving back into parts of the world where they have eased lockdown, and countries are seeing a second spike in infections. And we have to be prepared that the pandemic is going to be moving around the world for quite some time to come. Certainly most experts are predicting it's going to be moving around the world for at least the next year. It might even go into a second year. Now we've got to be prepared for that, because that might mean that once our lockdown has gone through enough time after lockdown being released, that we might experience a second wave here. Medical experts are predicting we may well get a second wave in November. If that happens, and it leads to another period of school closures because of a national lockdown, then the current Year 12, you may have a disrupted year at school next year as well. And if we think worst case scenario, we might be in the position where exam boards next year say that cohort of students have had too much disruption to their education for them to take exams, so we need you to generate centre assessed grades again. Now, what evidence will we use, Year 12, when we are coming up with those grades? Well, the evidence we used for this year's Year 13 stretch right the way back to when they began in Year 12. So therefore we will be using your performance up until the school closure in March, and your performance since then while we've been in lockdown, as part of our evidence platform for trying to give you the most generous centre assessed grade that we can. So that is why it is really important in Year 12 that you are engaging with your schoolwork as actively as you can and making your work right now as excellent as it can be, because we might be having to rely on that to help form part of the evidence that we put forward for grades for you next year, if in the worst case scenario you have another disrupted year of schooling and your grades are generated in that way. So as I keep saying to you every week in briefing, Year 12, it is so important that you are engaging with remote learning right now, that you're keeping on top of it, and that if you are able to, that you come into school and you engage with your teachers face to face. If you're not able to, that you are actively engaging digitally with them through email, through the Google Classroom, and that you are keeping on top of your work so that they can ensure that you are learning and making progress, because that will give us the best chance of being able to ensure success for you, either in the exams when you sit them next year, or if we have to generate centre assessed grades. I said to you weeks ago, it was in the second briefing after lockdown began, I gave you this quote. Everyone was very worried. We were all very anxious in the early days of lockdown. And I gave you this quote as my "and finally" quote that week. And it said, don't worry about what you can't control. Our focus and energy needs to be on the things we can control. Attitude, effort, focus, these are things we can control. And I want to come back to that to you now. We're approaching the end of Module 6. You are in control of your attitude to learning, to remote learning. You are in charge of how much effort you put in, and you are in charge of how focused you are on the dreams that you want to fulfill by getting qualifications. Focus on the things you can control at the moment. Because, as Pythagoras, the guy that invented the theorem in maths, said, the wise man should be prepared for everything that does not lie within his control. And right now, being in the middle of a pandemic, there's lots of things out of our control, so we should be doing everything we can do, the things that we are in control of, to make sure we're prepared for how the future might look. So you've got to be working hard at home, you've got to be engaging, you've got to be putting the PlayStation remote control down and picking up a pen and writing. You've got to set your alarm in the morning to make sure that you are up and functioning and doing a day of schoolwork, rather than lying asleep in bed all day and becoming like some kind of nocturnal bush baby. Because at any given moment, you have the power to say, this is not how my story will end. The pandemic is not going to decide the outcome of your qualifications, Year 12. Your effort, your attitude, your focus, how much control you take of your current situation, that is what is going to dictate how your story will end, what qualifications you will leave us with, so that you have the best options for the end of Year 13. I hope you all have a good week. I shall look forward to seeing you all again next week. Bye for now.